Yesterday's client-server architectures were easily protected by firewalls and layered security, or defense in depth. But today's highly distributed service-oriented architectures in hybrid cloud environments require a new approach, something called a cloud DMZ. Hi, I'm Stan Gibson, and I'll be your host and moderator for this webcast. Joining me to explore how best to secure your data from today's threats and how a cloud DMZ can help are Pete Lindstrom, Research Director at IDC. Welcome, Pete.
Thanks, Stan. Glad to be here.
And Robert Berlin, Senior Director of Product Marketing of Soha Systems. Great to have you with us, Robert.
Thank you, Stan. Great to be here as well.
Well, before we dive in, just a quick word about this webcast. We are live and interactive, and that means we want to hear from you and our audience. If a question occurs to you at any time, please type it into the Q&A box on your screen and then press the submit button. We'll do our best to answer it during the Q&A segment. To enjoy this feature, you will need to disable your pop-up blocker. We're going to start things off with our first polling question, which should be appearing on your screen momentarily. All right. And the question is, well, we'd like to better understand the needs and interests of our webinar attendees today. So how would you best describe your status with respect to Cloud DMZ? Your choices are actively researching Cloud DMZ options and alternatives, currently implementing a SaaS-based Cloud DMZ offering, currently implementing a machine-based Cloud DMZ capability, or finally, no active projects, just trying to understand security in the cloud options. So please make your selection among those choices. Choose one of the options. And gentlemen, I'm thinking that most people are going to say they're actively researching Cloud DMZ options, but we might see some people currently implementing. What do you think?
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because I don't think the concept of the Cloud DMZ is particularly apparent to folks. And so one of the reasons I'm excited to be doing the research is that it's fairly nascent. But I think the concepts and the techniques will be very similar to what folks already use. What do you think, Robert?
I think I agree, Pete. We fundamentally see that, as organizations are moving to the cloud, they're looking to what they've done in the enterprise to evaluate whether those models and mechanisms are going to work in the cloud. And that's why the Cloud DMZ is so interesting. It's a fairly easy concept to understand, but of course the cloud brings out different variables and different kinds of issues that, quite frankly, we haven't had to deal with up until now.
All right. I think we're waiting just a few more seconds for our audience to vote, and then we'll look at the results momentarily. Oh, there they are. Okay, well, certainly a fair number actively researching, as we suspected, but perhaps more than we suspected. No active projects, just trying to understand security in the cloud. And no one among our audience, in fact, currently implementing a SaaS-based Cloud DMZ offering or a machine-based Cloud DMZ capability. And do you find that at all surprising, Robert and Pete?
Well, I think that just trying to get your head around what a Cloud DMZ is probably a new concept, and I think that's why we've had so much interest in this webinar. Security in the cloud and security for applications running in the cloud certainly is not new, and there's a variety of approaches. And I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to hearing from Pete today is how those different approaches are taking shape, and the Cloud DMZ being one of prime interest, obviously, to Soha. Pete, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel the same way. These numbers might change a little as we introduce the concepts here, and folks recognize that some elements of this have been around the security industry for quite some time, but really now we're at that point where we're operationalizing cloud and creating hybrids, and we have to start making some claims about what kind of turf we need from a security control plane perspective, from a Cloud DMZ perspective, as we deal with the distributed and mobile enterprise.
All right. Okay. Well, Pete, you're first up, so I'll leave things to you at this point.
I am, and thanks very much, Stan. I appreciate it. And an interesting polling question. As I indicated, I'm excited to be with you guys today to talk about these newer concepts. As you'll find out, some of these are rooted in old school concepts and some not. I've been around the block in the security space. I've been an auditor. I've been a security architect. I've run identity management programs and have been doing a lot of analysis, comparing and contrasting of solutions, and speaking with hundreds of enterprises like those of you out there in webcast land to really try to get a handle on where is security going and what do we need to do to deal with the realities of IT architectures today. And so when we look at where IT is going, we have to pay attention in order to map our security requirements. IDC has a concept we call the third platform, which talks through how architectures have changed through time. You know, we started with the mainframe, very straightforward. That was first platform. As second platform came on with client-server architectures and even the nascent parts of the internet and kind of basic websites and the like, that was second platform. And now third platform has really hit the world by storm. We can't. It's almost cliche to be talking about some of these capabilities, and really the devil's in the details, right? It's one thing to go, okay, well, mobile, cloud, big data, social, they're everywhere. We have to figure out how we're going to leverage these things in order to get smarter about our environment. From a security perspective, it's really interesting to me because we have to be careful not to halt progress. We have to be smart about the way we drive security into the enterprise. And the cool thing is we get a lot of new options with these new architectures as well. So I'm excited to hear more about what we can do. But if you think of the way IT architectures have progressed from monolithic mainframe to 2- and 3-tier client server to N-tier web and N-tier web services, we keep building out abstraction layers and distributed components in our environments. And so the security person has to recognize, number one, there's great value in how our IT architecture folks are building things. There must be, otherwise we wouldn't be adopting them so readily. And number two, even as we get to distributed components and standardized communication and the like, we're creating attack points that we have to protect. We have to take care of them in some way from a risk management perspective. That doesn't mean we try to put Pandora, put all the pieces back into Pandora's box, but it does mean we have to be smart about how we build out our architectures. So from a security perspective, we recognize the first platform, really not that hard, menu-based security of users driven through menus on the mainframe. Second platform got pretty interesting with the distributed activity. That's really when I really got started as an auditor and going around an application, the client-server application, to get to like the report writers and the ports being exposed on the network were pretty trivial in lots of ways. And then finally, we're working on third platform capability, which factors in user experience. So the second, I think the second platform scared a whole bunch of us and made us try to retract and do that, put Pandora's box back together. And we didn't realize that we can't take away the user experience. The user is going to revolt, and we saw a lot of that through the 90s and the early aughts. And we're finally getting to the point where we have to be smarter about our architectures and eliminate any kind of overhead associated with the user while we evaluate risk. Risk is a crucial component to all this because we can't be impervious to attack. We can't create infallible architectures. And we recognize that on its surface. When I say that, you all probably said, duh. But when we look at the evaluation process, more often than not, we're talking about a single incident being some indicator of extreme failure. Now, it's an indicator of failure, no doubt, but there's a lot of successes out there as well that we have to kind of pay attention to. And so what we want to do is put folks into the position of being smarter about their IT security architecture. So if you're like most enterprises who have built out their architectures, you've created zones of trust, right? You have a data center, security in your data center. You've created a perimeter, and you have basically worked on a defense in depth kind of approach where you want to enclose sets of resources and assets in your environment. And, of course, this makes sense, right? We're trying, not only is it effective, but it also can be efficient. When your data center looks like this, it's very useful and highly effective. The problem is our data centers very rarely actually look like that. Nowadays, with those third platform capabilities, mobile and cloud and social and big data, we have a much broader need to address and protect resources that may or may not be within our control. So defense in depth is really cool, but defense in depth sort of disappears when we're not collecting and aggregating resources. The more we distribute out our components, the more thoughtful we get about risk associated with things like, employee email addresses as compared to the keys to the kingdom, R&D data, or much more sensitive Social Security numbers and that sort of stuff. We have to think about how we're maintaining zones of trust. Many of you, I bet, were a part of the Swiss cheese era when we started making fun of the firewall for opening up all the ports, and then slowly we evolved to, we only have to open up one port, it's port 80, and every application is pumped through there, and dealing with things in that way. But not only that, but there's no inside or outside in today's world, right? We're sharing resources all over the place, and so we have to think about an environment that just understands incoming and outgoing, regardless of where the source of the activity might be and where the target resource is. And by the way, we're continuing to evolve. I got to tell you, I'm excited about this. No doubt about it. This is some great architecture, but we have to be smart as security professionals to really drive home the need for how we're going to protect our organizations. So as we distribute out our perimeter and our components, we start going, okay, well, defense in depth and perimeter-based security, layered security, that's all fine and dandy for our host-based approach to security and our network-based approach to security, but this stuff is just too dynamic. Our components, our apps, our workloads, our identities, and our data are all over the map, and we know that, right? We've been lamenting this challenge for years, and yet still fall back to our comfort zone of security zones and perimeters. Some of you probably remember the deperimeterization movement that started about 10 years ago, and we're still there for a lot of this. So we have to keep paying attention to the nature of the changes and see if we can adapt. When I think of the cloud DMZ, I start getting excited about this distributed architecture. So we're not talking about a traditional DMZ that has that inbound and outbound flavor to it. I got to tell you, in a lot of respects, we don't even pay close attention to it. It's this waypoint right along the way for activity when we're transferring from an untrusted zone to a trusted zone. In this day and age, if you're still thinking of trust versus distrust as a binary decision, you're not in the right field. There are so many variations on this that we have to pay attention. So we have to build out really a last stand, circling the wagons kind of location for our most secure assets. This is where we put our bastion hosts. This is where we put that final perimeter security around security resources. And sometimes I think another good analogy for this is like thinking about a control plane. It's funny, Robert and I went back and forth about the nature of how to think about this concept, and we're back and forth on cloud DMZ versus control plane. And you'll see references to this kind of stuff in the literature today. If you're a network person, then you know SDNs are dealing with control planes and centralized command and control. Hey, I'm an old Marine, as you saw, hoorah, and the Marine Air Ground Task Force has been task organized this way for its entire life. That is centralized command and control, decentralized execution. And so it's that central portion that we're talking about as the cloud DMZ. Now, even if some of you folks don't want to put it in the cloud because let's say you don't have a mobile environment, right? There's a lot of you out there. Raise your hand if you don't have a mobile. Oh, nobody? Wait a second. We have to really think about where our enterprise assets, our IT assets, begin and end. And it turns out that the challenge for us ends up being this word cloud, I think, more often than not, where we go, okay, well, that just makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't know what kind of control I'm going to have in the cloud. I don't know who's responsible for it, and so on and so forth. I got to tell you, in the back office of IDC, we're having grand debates about all the different variables that make up cloud architectures. And most of you probably already know that if you want to design a distributed cloud architecture that you think doesn't exist, it actually does somewhere. Whether it's who's hosting it, location-wise, whether it's the deployment model, whether it's licensing on the financial side, whether it's where the bodies are for things, the consumption models, the provisioning models, all that stuff, you can find it. And so the notion of a cloud DMZ should be sort of a not quite ho-hum to you, routine stuff, even though this is an acknowledgement of what we've known for years. It's an opportunity. I think of it as an opportunity, right? An opportunity for us to really succeed with hub and spokes kind of architectures where you have the central command and control and decentralized execution of security. So the new security control plane, the new cloud DMZ, really deals with termination points that are along the path of the user activity. We need that place to where we can transfer, say, a push and a pull, or do some processing or apply some policy and that sort of thing in our environments. We have a controlled set of management resources. At least here, we should be able to really have a good understanding of what nodes are on the network and what their makeup is and what their patch status is, for example, and all that sort of. We want to use these termination points as the start and end of communication security, where we can provide encryption and the like, and really focus on this single point of management, but also rapid deployment. So if your central command and control arm is properly configured, then you can push out policy enforcement points. In fact, I've done some research on software-defined security where we're pushing out firewalls and UTM-style things and web security and individual components to the individual resources that are being protected, whether it's at the application layer, at some virtual layer, or at even at a physical host layer that might not be in your traditional data center in where you need to be. So we're paying attention to this kind of stuff because it is the area where we're going to originate all of our security thought. It's where we're going to retrieve all of our reporting and really get an understanding for how things are working there. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'm not that excited about this diagram, which I created. So, but the idea here is you have this control plane that can be situated in a cloud DMZ. The separation and the perimeter kinds of defense, they don't actually go away, right? It still makes sense a lot of times financially to aggregate resources if you can. We see a little bit more of it in a virtual world and the like, but more and more we're pushing this stuff outward and trying to get a better understanding of where my identities are, where my data is, and where my workloads are. So we need to tie them back home to a root of trust inside a cloud DMZ. We need to control them with the resources inside the cloud DMZ in control plane manner and really get smart about this. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited that when you look at, I'll give you an example, DRM. Oh my gosh, we shiver about DRM. But who doesn't have data that's going all the heck over the place, right? And now we just have encrypted data, blobs of data, unstructured stuff where we can apply policy to, and it makes complete sense to have that stuff out there. When we push out our resources and we need to have the resources communicate back up with our centralized command and control place, what are we going to do? How are we going to actually accomplish that? I think the Soha solution is a way for you to think about that and gives you some opportunities there for sure as we continue to build this stuff out. You know, I kind of poo-pooed the nature of the cloud being insecure. In fact, I do a lot of research, and it doesn't have to be less secure than your data center. In fact, More often than not, it probably isn't. But you do have to pay closer attention. You do have to design an architecture that fits within this kind of distributed model, or you're going to be in trouble. The real problem with the cloud is that it forces us to rethink things we thought were said and done 30 or 40 years ago, when in actuality they were antiquated and legacy 20 years ago, and yet we kept them on as if it wasn't. So when we look at a security control plane and within a cloud DMZ, we have a better fit for this distributed model. We have a more dynamic approach to security. It aligns itself with the way folks are thinking. The dual nature of security is that not only are we required to protect the assets and resources being distributed out into these architectures, but the cool thing is we can leverage them. We can do them ourselves, use them ourselves. And so getting dynamic around things and isolating our components and the like is very, very useful for us in our environment. Finally, sometimes we need to shake things up a bit, and there's a lot of pressure on us. And I talk to enterprises and CISOs wanting to fall on their sword because of a single breach, people recognizing they can't get things done within their enterprise. And here's a way to really rethink and reframe security. This is what I love the most. Like, if you're in reactive, FUD-based, oh my gosh, you can't do this mode because I'm scared, then you got to get out of that. You got to start thinking about reframing that to here's the nature of my architecture. Here's how I've designed things from a security perspective. Here are the metrics I've collected so that you can actually validate that I'm doing a great job, even if sometimes my data gets breached or my assets and resources get breached, and really getting smarter about security. So how do we do that? Well, start talking to your IT architects. Make sure you know what they're doing, because more often than not, you can align your program along with that. We've got to get rid of this notion of defense in depth. We talk about it all the time. So here's what I want you guys to do. The next time you see a presentation that has a castle on it, and it's going to say security is like a castle, I want you to boo them off the stage. I don't really mean that, because it'll probably be given by me. Not really. But that way of thinking has to be eradicated from our field. That's just not how things work. It's like fighting the old wars. It doesn't make sense. I want to deploy enforcement points to those resources that are targeted based on risk assessment for the security controls that are required for my environment. And I can do that easily and very quickly if I have this control plane to work from in my environment. And finally, this highly secure central location, this is where you will be running your security operations center. And I don't mean just the reactive stuff. I mean all the management, all the admin, all the capabilities there within this highly secure environment. I'm excited to see what you guys have going on and how you keep thinking about security. I love chatting with you. I hope you maintain some contact with me. But my part of this webinar is just about over, and I'd like to pass the baton. Thank you very much, and I'll pass the baton back to Stan. Thanks, Stan.
Well, yeah, thanks very much, Pete. Really fascinating presentation. Thank you. I would like to remind members of our audience, if you haven't yet asked a question, you can do so by simply typing it into the Q&A box on your screen and then pressing the Submit button. And if we possibly can, we'll answer it during the Q&A segment toward the end of the webcast. I'd like to hand things now to Robert Berlin of Soha. Robert.
Well, thank you, Stan, and thank you, Pete, for that great introduction to the concepts and issues around cloud security and the cloud DMZ. I'm excited to talk to everybody this morning about Soha. I'm sure for a lot of you, this is your first introduction to us. And we are a SaaS-based security company focused on providing cloud security solutions. And I'd like to do just a couple of things here in the next few minutes, really talk to you about the problems that we're solving and how we got here, and then talk to you a little bit about our solution. We didn't start off by saying we want to be a cloud DMZ or a security control plane. we really started off Soha by thinking about some of the problems inherent in cloud security that were different than traditional data center security. And so what are those differences? Well, there's a huge one. Just to kind of start this off, think about this. In the enterprise data-centric world, you own the hardware, you own the data center, it's under your control. Your applications are running in that data center, and your users are on your network. It's a completely closed-loop system. Sure, there's remote access into that network, but in essence, those are all controllable items. In a cloud-based world where your applications are running in the cloud, perhaps Amazon or perhaps Microsoft Azure or Google or even VMware, your apps are running in a cloud somewhere. Your users are literally anywhere on any kind of a device. But the important thing is you don't own the cloud. You don't necessarily know where the applications are. In some cases, you're not even the owner of the applications. You're running a SaaS. You're using a SaaS product. And your users are not on the network. So in the cloud, it's impossible for users to be on the same network as the application, and that's a fundamental difference between our legacy data center model. So the only way for them to get to their app is from the outside, and that usually means the internet. Well, the trouble is that when you open up your cloud environment to the internet, it means that you're now opening up your cloud and hence your applications and hence your data to a variety of attacks. DDoS attacks, compromised credentials, malware, a host of different kinds of breaches, hijackings, and compromises. And we see this every week. We see it so often that we are becoming numb to it. If we just look at the current headlines in the newspapers about what's happened just in the past 7 days. So the question really is, who owns the responsibility for security in the cloud, for the security of your applications, and ultimately the security of the data in your clouds? Well, in the case where you're using a public cloud provider, again, Amazon, Microsoft Azure, vCloud Air, they're all using something called a shared security model. And if we break the security model down to the basics, it's basically this. Your cloud service provider is taking care of securing their infrastructure all the way up typically to the hypervisor. And you, the customer, their customer, is responsible for securing what you run on your infrastructure, the host OS and the applications. It's a little bit like the landlord-tenant relationship where if you're renting an apartment, your landlord's responsible for the building security, insuring the building, but inside that apartment building, you've rented an apartment, you're really responsible for your content, the contents inside your apartment, and ensuring them as such. So there's this shared nature of responsibility, which I think is, in our experience here at Soha, it's actually surprising a lot of enterprise organizations that in moving from the data center to the cloud, one of the things that a lot of organizations thought they could check off was no longer have to worry about security. And really, that's not the case. And so really what this means is that you've got to be paying attention to this and thinking about how you're going to provide for security. So let's take a look at a couple of different approaches about how this can be done today. So one approach to building security in your cloud would be to go to the traditional route and build a data center-like perimeter. You can do this with a bunch of open source tools. You can buy virtual appliances from a number of traditional network security vendors. And after you have done that, you have essentially decided to acquire web application firewalls, IDSs, DDoSs, and other products that will go into your perimeter. And once you've done that, you've got to figure out a couple of different things that you probably hadn't planned on. One, how do I set up traffic flows through all of these virtual boxes? And how do I make sure that all of these boxes stay up? So to tackle those two problems, you probably need to buy 2 of every appliance so you can construct an overlay network or a high availability network. And next you'll have to connect your user to your cloud to a user directory, perhaps Active Directory or perhaps a third-party directory. You'll have to configure access, perhaps do some custom coding. You might need to buy some logging and log analysis infrastructure so you can actually monitor what's going on in your cloud security infrastructure. And you'll need to set up policies. You'll need to administer it. You'll need to basically own it. So doing that is an engineering project. That's much like replicating exactly what's in your private data center in the cloud via virtual appliances. And in our experience in talking to enterprise customers around the world, that will take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, about 3 engineers, and the cost of assembling and engineering and maintaining and managing all of those virtual machines will run about $100,000 per cloud. And many organizations have many clouds and many clouds across different cloud service providers. So it's an expensive and resource-intensive kind of operation. Now, there is a second approach, which is you can expose your applications to the internet. This is the I'm going to give up and just put all my applications on a public IP address, open up some security groups, and hope that nothing bad happens. This is not a good idea, as is probably evident, but it's the equivalent of basically putting your applications in the cloud and them being naked in the cloud without any protection. Enterprise applications were never meant or designed or configured to be just running naked in the cloud, because it exposes them to internet attacks. So let's take a look at a real-life situation of what exactly happens when you do exactly that. Put an application on a public cloud, give it a public IP address. We did that. We put up a simple application in a virtual private cloud on Amazon. We gave it a public IP address, and we opened it up to the internet. Not for any malicious reasons, but we were actually doing some of our own testing. Well, within 4 hours, we got a letter just like this that you see on the screen. We've presented this slide in other venues and gotten a lot of head shaking because this is an automated email that we get from Amazon that basically says our application has been hacked and recruited by a botnet. And this is more common than uncommon. And so what can you do about it? Well, you can go back and build that huge perimeter in the cloud, or perhaps you can look at other alternatives. So I'll pose the question here. So what if you could hide your applications in the cloud from the internet, lock down your cloud such that all of your inbound access was unavailable to threats and bots, yet you could still control the security and the access policies to basically let good guys into your applications and keep all those bad guys out, and had the full capability and management control that included logging and an audit trail. And what if you could have that up and running in about 15 minutes? Well, we're Soha Systems, soha.io for those of you who want to take a look at us after this webinar. And this is the problem set that we are solving with something called the Soha Cloud. With the Soha Cloud, we are tackling a number of cloud-based security issues, one of which is we're tackling that shared responsibility that is brought forward by doing business with the cloud service providers today. Our service is a security service. Part of it lives in the internet. Part of it lives inside your cloud environments, irrespective of which cloud they're running in. But the key is we make your clouds invisible to the internet. All of the users come through our cloud. Think of the Soha Cloud as a security cloud. And we provide the security before they get to your applications. Now, a little bit about how this works. Inside of your cloud, we have a component called a cloudlet. And it's an agent. It acts as a reverse proxy to your application. You can think of it as an application delivery controller, but managed by the Soha service. The only function that cloudlet has, or not the only function, but the cloudlet dials out to the Soha cloud, and that is the way that applications are allowed into, or users are allowed into your applications within your cloud. So essentially what happens is the user flow is a user will come in through a URL that's provided or an IP address. They will come into the Soha cloud. The Soha cloud will go do an authentication process, again, through Active Directory or whatever directory you happen to be using. It'll signal, once authenticated, it'll signal to the cloudlet that a user wants to come into the application. And it's only then that the cloudlet will dial out to the Soha cloud. And one of the pieces of unique capability that we do in Soha is we stitch together that connection between the user, the Soha cloud, and the customer's cloud and application, because obviously that could be strewn amongst many clouds, so it's really a multi-cloud routing problem that we are solving there. So what this in essence means is that all of your inbound ports are locked down. They are closed. Nobody can get into your app except through the Soha cloud. And it essentially moves all of the attack surface from your cloud to the Soha cloud. And what's great about it is you don't require any hardware. There's no additional software required, no network changes to your existing infrastructure. It's all a security as a service that, again, can be up and running in just about 15 minutes. So another way to think about this is that we're providing an air gap between your applications and the internet. Again, we authenticate off of your directories. We can apply multi-factor authentication as part of the access control policy before a connection into your cloud is actually established. And then once the connection is established, we can apply additional security measures on the data path. And as you would expect, the Soha Cloud is a highly available, highly scalable service. We've built it in the cloud from the ground up. Our main POPs are redundant. The cloudlets inside of your cloud can be redundant. We even perform server load balancing to your application front ends. So it's a highly engineered cloud-based service to ensure high availability and reliability across your different applications and your different clouds. We've hardened the cloud. We have part of our engineering team, their full-time job is to ensure that the security of our security cloud is performing at the top of its game. We perform 24/7 by 365 monitoring. We have outside organizations perform penetration testing and evaluate and audit our services. We have a growing list of certifications that we both have and working on. We've detailed this for you on our website, soha.io. And we welcome your evaluation of our capabilities via a proof of concept that we can make available to you by contacting us at soha.io. So the Soha Cloud really is an instantiation of what Pete was talking about in terms of a cloud DMZ. We provide that zone that really connects your users to their applications, but in the cloud, recognizing that the cloud has a bunch of variables and issues that are much different than a perimeter-based environment. So as we've gone about building the Soha Cloud, we've included a comprehensive feature set that is the replication of what you're probably using today in your enterprise data center. We continue to add to these capabilities, and we're happy to walk you through what we view as an extensive layered security fabric that enables all of the capabilities within the Soha Cloud. Soha is a relatively new company. We just announced ourselves and came out of stealth mode back in April. If you would like to visit our website, we have some extensive case studies and customer testimonials from customers that you see here, including BugCrowd and Criticism and Spirent and BitSite. We welcome you to download and read their use cases. We have a relationship with Nefascale. We are available today in the Amazon Web Services Marketplace. We have partnered with AWS because, again, there's an ongoing conversation that they have with customers around that shared security model. We are very soon going to be available in the Microsoft Azure Marketplace. And if you go to their Channel 9 blog, Rob Kuros, our VP of Product and Marketing here at Soha, had a blog published just last week talking about our partnership with Microsoft Azure and how we fulfill the shared security model with Microsoft. So we're very excited about that. So with that concludes my official comments around Soha and the Soha Cloud and how we fulfill the capabilities of a cloud DMZ. And I'll hand it back to Stan for our second polling question.
Well, thanks a lot, Robert. Yes, we'll go to that poll question right away. The question is, implementing a cloud DMZ type service, specifically Soha Cloud, can solve a number of existing and emerging security, access, identity, and compliance problems. Which of the following use cases most closely reflects your organization's near-term requirements? And you can choose more than one of these. Your choices are cloud service provider shared security responsibility, SaaS application protection and front-end SaaS protection, hybrid cloud security, multi-cloud routing, VPN replacement, managing third-party access and privileged access, and finally, software-defined perimeter. Again, you can choose more than one of those. Just make your choices and then hit that submit button, and we'll look at the results right away. Well, Robert and Pete, any thoughts as to how our audience might vote on this one?
Well, the low-hanging fruit here in my mind is along the lines of privileged access, third-party access, as well as the SaaS application protection. The challenge there is that there are a handful of different types of opportunities out there and different architectures for that. I'm curious, Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Pete. I think whether, privileged access, third-party access, and VPN replacement are in some ways, two sides of the same coin. We do get a lot of inquiries from prospects and ultimately customers around replacing VPNs. VPNs are hard to manage. They're clumsy. They provide privacy, but once somebody's on a VPN, they're then exposed to lots of things that they don't want to be necessarily exposed to in the cloud. And so we see a lot of interest sort of as a byproduct of the cloud, DMZ, Soha cloud, of people using this as a way to provide a very fine, granular mechanism to provide access control. So I think that's one of them. And I think the other one, which is emerging, is the SaaS application protection, or what some organizations call front-end SaaS protection, which is I'm a SaaS provider or I'm a born-in-the-cloud company, and I just assume that, either security wasn't a problem, and that's probably a naive approach, or that my cloud security provider probably provided that in some way, shape, or form. And the reality is that these organizations have to step up and provide that security infrastructure themselves.
All right. Well, I think we're about ready to look at the results, and perhaps those will appear on our screen momentarily. All right. Okay, well, we do have a first-place finisher that's managing third-party access and privileged access with 55.6%, and tied for last place, we have cloud service provider shared security responsibility and VPN replacement. Does this spectrum of results correspond to what you might have expected?
I think this is the cool thing, right? I mean, this is the point is about the model and about thinking about, how you're going to design your security architecture for the future. And it not only should it, but it must encompass these capabilities. The challenge will be in figuring out the evolution of how to go from your traditional, legacy data center kind of security and tie things together. But the way you do that is to align with your IT architects, your ops folks, as we operationalize the use of the cloud, and your network people that are building things out. So really, this is a reflection of the world as we know it, from my perspective, with so many different types of projects at so many different enterprises, trying to keep up with them.
Yeah, Pete, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that we see from the Soha side is that the number of different problem sets that organizations bring forward as their individual set of applications, or their use cases migrate to the cloud, be it moving enterprise apps into a cloud just so so they're taking advantage of agile resources, or they're using a SaaS application, or they themselves are a SaaS vendor. It's bringing to the table so many different issues around security and around management that were not contemplated even 3 years ago. That it's an exciting time to be a vendor and work with these organizations to try to solve these problems.
All right. Well, it is time now for the Q&A segment of this webcast, and we've got a number of really interesting questions in the queue, so let's go to those right away. Our first question is, our security DMZ initiative is being driven by PCI, specifically the requirement to use a DMZ, so there are no direct inbound or outbound connections to the trusted network. Does Cloud DMZ satisfy PCI requirements? A good question, I think. Peter, Robert?
Well, the thing about just about any architecture can satisfy PCI requirements. You have to talk to your auditors about it, and we see cloud-based architectures all the time satisfying the requirements. You have to design your security to meet up with them, but your PCI auditor will drive that conversation. There's nothing really uniquely new here. It's about putting the components together in ways that make sense for the way your IT architecture is evolving more than anything.
All right. We'll go to our next question now. Question is, why should we abandon defense in depth just to embrace our new security technologies? My security and compliance today relies on defense in depth. Abandoning it means starting over with internal approvals. Pete, can you address that possibly? Yeah.
Well, right, and sometimes I want to kind of toss that at folks just to force you to think. Right, defense in depth is a concept more than anything. It's not really an architecture. The hub and spokes architecture is still going to have the same individual components. So to the extent that you feel like you can aggregate resources and put a perimeter around them and have a layered approach, then go for it. What I would suggest is that you really look at your architecture and decide how things are going. How do people get into enterprises today? Through the user base more often than not. Hopefully you have defense in depth around your campus. Wait a second, users are remote. Hopefully you have defense in depth around your mobile environment. Oh my gosh, now we put SaaS apps into the cloud. You can't aggregate public SaaS apps. It's impossible. So what I'm suggesting is that you think about the individual components and putting them together potentially in different ways. Meanwhile, you can still aggregate your resources wherever they're aggregatable. The point is simply that it's less and less common that you can do that.
All right, let's go to our next question. We have a highly mobile environment. How will the Soha solution work with a large population of mobile users?
It's fundamentally the same issue. We view all users today as mobile users, whether they're because again our thesis is that users today and users of the future won't be on the land; they'll be on the internet. So again, we've built a highly scalable, highly reliable offering through redundancy, through high availability. We've tightly controlled our engineering of our product, and we add hardly any delay to the process, and we've got users today that are using us in large volumes of users. So we think it scales very nicely, and that's really part of the value add that we bring, which is we've done that scalability, reliability, and availability engineering as part of our service.
All right. I believe we have time for one more question, and that question is, will using a cloud DMZ slow down my network throughput?
No. We firmly believe that it will not. We've seen just really microsecond, millisecond delays, but recognize that the Soha cloud is in the data path, so there's not a lot of bouncing back and forth that you might expect through other kinds of architectures.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have in this live interactive webcast. Our thanks to IDC Research Director Pete Lindstrom and to Robert Berlin, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Soha Systems, for sharing their insights on today's cloud application and security landscape, and in particular, the importance of a cloud DMZ. For more information on this topic, please click on the green resources icon on your screen. And thanks for joining us for Soha at IDG. I'm Stan Gibson.